All right, you're welcome back. Barring any last-minute changes, President Muhammadu Buhari will be laying the 2019 budget estimates before a joint session of the National Assembly today, despite the warning industrial action by parliamentary staff.
Now, the president will present an appropriation bill of 8.7 trillion naira for consideration and passage by the National Assembly. President Buhari had last Thursday, in separate letters addressed to Senate President Bukola Saraki and Speaker of the House of Representatives, Yakubu Dogara, requesting the federal lawmakers to grant him audience today for 2019 budget presentation.
And the proposed 2019 budget estimate of 8.7 trillion naira is 420 billion naira less than the 2018 budget of 9.12 trillion naira, which historically was the highest so far. That's the
2018 budget. The highest in terms of naira in the history of Nigeria.
Absolutely. Well, joining us via Skype to discuss the proposed presentation of the 2019 budget estimates is a business analyst and chief economist. He's actually on phone, Vativa Capital, Michael Famoroti. Of course, with us right here in the studio for the same discussion is a public affairs analyst and presidential aspirant, Dan Akinlami. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Nice to see you.
For joining us. Okay, so barring all else, hopefully the 2019 appropriation bill will be presented to the National Assembly today. But let me start with Michael Famoroti, who's on the phone with us. What do you think, what are your expectations really as far as the 2019 budget is concerned? The Budget and Planning Minister, in assessing the 2017 budget, said it had an 86% performance rate. And then, of course, we hear that 2018 is about 36% and all of that. What do you expect for 2019?
Well, I think 2019 has the unique challenge of being an election year. So our base expectation for the first quarter of the year is that there's not going to be as much activity as politicking takes center stage. Now, when you combine that with the usual practice that we've seen of budgets being passed around the end of the second quarter, it does raise the question as to how relevant the 2019 budget will be in the first half of the year. So we are hopeful that we see an early budget passage, perhaps in the first quarter, but recent trends suggest that it's something that whoever wins the elections will have to deal with around May, June.
Okay, Dan, let me bring you in here now. The budget of 2018 has just been signed into law sometime in June. Making it just six months into the implementation. And then we have a new budget that is being presented right now. When it comes to restoring the cycle and all of that, how difficult or challenging would it be to restore the cycle? Because the government made the effort or made the move to restore it at a time to have it from January to December.
Well, obviously, it's been very difficult to reset the cycle. And we've been with this for quite a long time. If you look at it chronically, from 1999, we've hardly had the budget presented earlier than December, except on some few occasions that President Obasanjo was able to present in October. And also, President Buhari also presented the 2018 budget on November 7th. So, yes. But I think the earlier we've got it presented, getting to the National Assembly, was under Jonathan administration, which was on October 7th, 2012, when he presented the 2013 budget. So I think we still have a lot to do. The bottleneck is there. The administrative bureaucracy is still there. And we haven't achieved the target. For the past 19 years, we've been going around this circle. And also don't forget that part of this problem is the budget padding and the attending delays. So I think as we're going into this transition, it should be one of the key areas that the people campaigning for the presidential position should be looking at. How effectively can we reform the budgeting process?
Yeah, so you feel the discourse around the economy and all of these elements are not on the front burner from the politicians?
It's not.
Anyway,
Anyway, we still have enough time before February 16, the election date.
Do we really have enough time?
Yeah, we still have enough time to see what they will turn out in terms of policies. But as it is now, we need drastic reform going forward in the next transition. Serious reform starting from the budgeting office. And then the collaboration that should be happening between the executive and the National Assembly has never existed. It only exists once in a while when some interests are involved. They speedily attend to some certain items and get things done. So, but we need to have a better system where the executive can work smoothly more with the National Assembly to get this process fast-tracked. But I think people have proposed several time frame for us to get this thing happening in a faster way. Some have even said if the budget is presented as early as August or September, it should be passed before we enter into January.
If not June, like, I mean, in other parts of the world, you know, they will say, halfway into the year, you should
and
be
just
able
look
to
at this
determine what
2018
you're
budget we are
projecting
talking
for the
about.
next year.
This was signed.
Okay, let me bring in
exactly.
Michael Famoroti. Some experts have been saying that there are areas that may suffer, according to, you know, capital expenditure, ERGP, some investment portfolios, and of course the financial performance of some banks, especially with their exposure to the oil market. You know, a lot of them have been suffering a lot of volatility. Which areas do you think really would pose a challenge in the 2019 budget?
I think the low-hanging fruit always is capital expenditure. So if you look at the 2018 budget implementation, because the budget was passed so late and because of all the issues that we've had so far in 2018, CAPEX releases have been very little. And again, there's a danger that that is going to happen in 2019. The trend has also been that most of the CAPEX disbursements for a particular year come in the early part of the subsequent year, like a lot of the capital investment that the government has done in 2018 were from the 2017 budget. Again, because it's an election year and because there's also the additional challenge of agreeing and passing through a new minimum wage legislation, it's going to be a really interesting time because just as my colleague in the studio said, the executive and the legislature have not really seen eye to eye on these fiscal matters.
All right, now when
you said the executive and the legislature have not really seen eye to eye on these fiscal matters.
All right, now let me stay with you, Michael. The performance of the 2018 budget, which has been the highest budget in the history of Nigeria in terms of the naira value of it. A lot of analysts are still saying that if this budget does not perform at least optimally or at least on average, it's going to affect subsequent years. What's your concern to the performance of the 2018 budget?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that paper budgets don't mean anything, regardless of how high your nominal amount is, be it 8 trillion or 10 trillion. What matters is the execution. And again, this is most relevant for capital expenditure. I think budgeted CAPEX for 2018 is somewhere around 3 trillion. Now, there is no way we're going to do even half of that, right? So we need to get to a point where we're assessing the budget not on the projected figures, but on what we actually spend, because that gives a truer picture of fiscal spending for the year.
All right, back to that in the studio here. I mean, with the headline, from the Vanguard, Akaboys actually says that the FG is facing serious financial challenges. He even talked about labor there, the NLC, and of course the NLC has been talking about calling for the government to actually factor in the new minimum wage in the 2019 budget. You wonder how all of this would actually play out, and then there's the the benchmark, $60. The 2019 budget is being benchmarked at $60.
Well, I think
While the global oil price right now stands at about 57. So how will all of this, play out?
It keeps looking tough and tough by the day. And if you look at it for the past few years, FG has always been facing financial burden. Like you said, going into 2019, the possibility for that budget to be able to do better than what we have now is very low, with the attending increase in minimum wage. Also, there is this complaint from the budget office that the expected revenue was not forthcoming. There are some agencies that are expected to have, returned some certain amount of money that's supposed to have shot up the revenue for this 2018 budget. That they've not met the expectation. So looking at all this scenario and the oil price going into 2019 can still not be predictable. So I think we are really facing a tough time ahead. But it will now depend on how the transition ends. It's not surprising that this particular budget that is to be presented today is a bit leaner than 2018
last year's
budget.
Yeah.
Because the election year budget is always like that. So there will be enough room for whoever forms the next government to forward a supplementary budget to back it up.
If need be. All right. Now, but the issue of, you're talking about the benchmark, the oil benchmark of $60. We have always used the benchmark to, predicate on the budget. But it has also proven that it has never really been sustainable because it tells the volatility of the economy. And it calls to the question to the issue of diversification. The government has always talked about the need to diversify, and one wonders if they're really taking any steps to actually diversify the economy in that regard. Other analysts will say, well, the country is already diversified, but what effort should government put in that regard?
Well, I think the reality is this, like Mr. Famoroti said. The election year budget is usually a silent and quiet budget. You hardly see the policies being driven with force and passion, because all the ministries and people that are supposed to be driving it, everybody is involved in the electoral process, trying to push their campaign to get re-elected. So we are not going to really see much difference. We can only be lucky if the oil price finds its way to be higher than what we are projecting now. But anything crashing below that, we're going to have a difficult time. And coming back to the issue of diversifying the economy, I think this government has put in several policies, the agricultural aspect, and so many areas, but we have not really seen that impact on the budget so far. So for now, we can only be looking forward to what the transition will look like.
Okay, and it's, I wonder if Michael Famoroti thinks it looks good. We've been told over and over again that, look, Nigeria does not have a debt problem. What Nigeria has is a revenue problem, talking about diversifying revenue base and moving away from this monoproduct economy. Now there's the debt profile, that's about 22 trillion naira, and the external reserves continue to dwindle. How will all of this play out? Is there any cause for worry at all, especially with the elections, around the corner too?
Yes, there's definitely cause for worry, particularly on, well, I think first of all, on the external reserves. The CBN is going to have to burn through those pretty quickly to defend the currency. And the receiver's base expectation for 2019 actually is that at some point the currency value is going to weaken near the end of the year. But also on the debt front, regardless of whether we have a revenue or debt problem, the solution is the same. We need to borrow less and grow our revenues. And because the latter is more difficult and more long-term, for 2019, we have to focus on reducing our borrowing to bring debt within sustainable levels. And that's where we are right now.
All right, but government has been borrowing. In fact, the government has borrowed so much in the year between 2017 and 2018. And if you look at the commensurate investment in either capital expenditure and all of that, a lot of analysts are saying that it is not necessarily commensurate to how much the government has borrowed. So how will this, because it puts more burden on the debt profile, how will this affect the performance of the 2019 budget?
So I think it's good that Nigerians are aware that at least for 2017, the government did borrow to pay recurrent expenditure, right? For overheads and salaries. That's the reality, right?
Yeah.
Revenues could not cover all our expenses on salaries and overheads, so we had to borrow. Now, when you're in that position, you know that debt is not going to be efficient, because it's very different when you're borrowing for capex and when you're borrowing to pay salaries, right? 2019 isn't going to be much different, especially if we see an increase in the minimum wage, right? All prices are lower, probably, so revenues will not be as healthy either, right? So we are really in a tricky position, which is why in the short term, we need to focus on reducing spending, not passing this new minimum wage law, and reducing borrowing.
Okay, Dan, the Budget and Planning Minister actually, gave a pass mark to the budget performance. He said that the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan has actually delivered on the two planks, which is number one, pulling the economy out of recession, and of course, putting the economy, back on the path of growth. I wonder whether you agree with this.
Well, I think the facts are there, and there are more statistics pointing to the fact that the economy is gradually growing, but not as expected to be by now. But the truth is this: the man on the street that is facing the major part of this challenge has not yet felt the difference about this growth we're talking about. So that is where the work is. So until we are able to see the sign that we alleviate the suffering of the people, we alleviate the basic challenge the people are facing, especially on the staple foods.
Yeah.
Until we see the prices crashing, and that people
coming down.
Coming down, yes. And people can now afford to get some of these things easily. Then we have not really achieved much.
And there's still infrastructure deficit.
Yes.
There's housing
So
deficit.
it is one thing for the
deficit and all
statistics to
of
be
that.
pointing to the fact that the economy has now started
It's picking up.
growing. But the reality is that we need to see that effect
on the common
on the
man.
market.
Yeah, and the impact on the average man. Now, Michael, before I let you go now, what do you foresee as the general challenge before the 2019 budget, if, as the president submits it or presents it
Today.
to the National Assembly today?
I think it will be the same challenge that we normally have, just accentuated by the fact that it's an election year, right? How long will it take the National Assembly to look at the budget, to agree on it, and to pass it? And on that, your guess is as good as mine.
Dan? Okay, Michael Famoroti, thank you so much for joining us this beautiful Wednesday morning. So, what are you looking forward to? What are those things, the low-hanging fruits that you think should be taken care of as we inch towards 2019?
Well, I think it's still the same concern. We need to watch out for how the National Assembly will proactively handle the budget this time around. We hope they're not going to even come to start sitting, inviting the MDAs after February 16 election.
To come
But
and
they're all
defend
busy
their,
now campaigning.
defend their budgets.
So
as usual.
that's one aspect. And the second aspect is the funding of the budget. So that's an area that we have to look at critically, and that the federal government has to really work
there's a difference
hard.